We're honored to have Dr. Michael Byron, President and CEO of Nighthawk Gold. Michael's a seasoned geologist with over 30 years of fieldwork, research, and senior management experience, both in gold and metal and base metals, nickels, diamonds, gemstones exploration. He co-founded a number of exploration companies with interest in North and South America, most notably Aurora Platinum Corp, Lakeshore Gold, and Falco Resources, all names that are very well known in the Canadian market, and here as well, I hope. He now turns his sights to the Northwest Territories and Nighthawk's Indian Lake gold property. It's an underexplored Archean gold camp centered around a multi-million ounce asset known as the Kolomak Gold Project. Michael, welcome.
Well, good morning, everyone. As you probably know from the introduction, we're a gold company exploring in the Northwest Territories of Canada, and it's kind of a common theme in our industry these days, going back and looking at former producers and looking for an opportunity to resurrect what was left. And Kolomak's very much one of those, but this takes on a different sort of evolution, is that we consolidated the gold camp that it sits in, because we really thought that this was an opportunity to get in early and create a story that the market would probably come to in time, given the fact that the strategics tend to look for these sorts of land positions in good jurisdictions and so on and so forth, and obviously with the ability to grow. So I'll just walk through quickly today and show you some of the things that we're up to. There'll be a few forward-looking statements. Just as our highlight page, it's a district scale, so about 900 square kilometer land package, contiguous land package. That's roughly 60 kilometers in the north-south dimension by 25 kilometers at the widest. Underexplored simply because it's an Archean gold belt, greenstone belt, that hasn't seen the exploration of our traditional land or our historical camps in Canada. But yet it's the same age of rock, same age of mineralization, same style of mineralization, and so on and so forth. So for me, that checked off a little bit of the things that I look for if I want to get busy in a certain area. Vastly underexplored simply means there's opportunities to find near-surface stuff, and we've been doing that from the beginning. We have a great cash position, sitting currently about 25 million. We're going to spend probably a little over 11 million. This year in our exploration program, we're going to do 25,000 plus meters. An aggressive field program as well in the summer, a lot of mapping, geophysics. We do have some strategic investors. Kinross came in about a little over a year and a half ago, largely for the reasons I alluded to, Kolomak being something similar to that some of the principals there had worked on in Western Australia, as well as the camp that it sits in. So they saw sort of the thesis that we were building, and they saw it early and took a position. And Cisco Royalties, well, pre-royalties, it was Cisco Mining 1. So they both owned about 10% of our stock. Our resource, we have about 2.1 million ounce resource. That's our maiden resource. So when we acquired the asset from the federal government in late 2011, we knew that there was a lot of ounces left in the ground and a lot of growth potential. So with one drill program, 11,000 meters, we put that resource out. So you can tell it was largely a validation of what the historical data was there. Went on to discover some high-grade domains inside the Kolomak sill. Did some early metallurgy. Obviously, we're quite pleased with the recoveries, up to 98%. It's very clean rock. There's no nasty elements that are going to impact the sensitive environment up there. We did last year a little over 26,000 meters. So since we acquired the asset in late 2011, we've done about 50,000 meters. So we're going to be putting a new resource update out next month. These maps just show you where we're sitting in Yellowknife, or north of Yellowknife, a couple hundred kilometers. We have a 5,000-foot airstrip on site, so we can move in rather large fixed-wing aircraft. There's good ice road network. That's the red line. If we we've got a pointer. Maybe we don't have a pointer. Anyways, the red line is the ice road that the territorial government puts in every year to access a First Nation community to the east of us. It cuts through roughly the center of our land package, and we're fully permitted to run our own ice road spurs and have north and south to various deposits that we're looking at. The dashed line is the new road that's going to be built probably starting in early 2019 up to Wati, a First Nations community. So the territorial government and the First Nations, and we're dealing with the Talicho First Nations, are very progressive and very keen at developing infrastructure, which is kind of music to our ears. And we're certainly supportive of any ambition that they put forward that will help us mature our assets. It is a greenstone belt. You can see that on the map to the left, our contiguous land package, Colmac sitting roughly at the north central portion. What really interested me when I first started working in this camp was just the intense grade that I could see at some of the deposits, in particular Damati Lake, which is gold and iron formation. It has a half-ounce average grade. And then I started looking farther afield and saw that this is reproducing itself over and over in some other deposits, Colmac included. So, you know, it checked all my boxes that we should consolidate this camp and surround Colmac, and then approach the federal government about doing a deal for Colmac, which we did, and we consummated that deal in late 2011. There is a diversity of deposit types throughout this camp, which you'll see in most Archean systems. Just telling you that most brittle regimes are accommodating mineralization from north to south, east to west, and they're carrying grade and thickness. So it tells me the system's far-reaching and it's robust. And no one's drilled below 100 meters in the camp. Just a map showing you the lay of the land in Colmac. There's 5 deposits that make up the Colmac inventory. 95% of the resource comes from the main sill. That's the large sinuous blue in the center of the diagram. So most of our work has been on the Colmac main sill and Goldcrest, the sister sill that sits to the west of it a few hundred meters. What was missed when Royal Oak had this in the 90s and was Colmac's a differentiated mafic sill, and that wasn't demonstrated until we drilled our first hole under it in 2012 and did the trace element geochemistry to demonstrate that there is a fractionation of event that happened when this sill was cooling, whereby the top of the sill, being more silica rich, is more brittle, and the base of the sill is more iron and magnesium rich. So you've got the competency contrast. But more important, if it's a differentiated mafic sill, there are not many in the Canadian Archean. In any of our big mining camps, there are no producers like this. So I had to look further afield, and that led me to Western Australia, the Kalgoorlie mining camp, and the Golden Mile dolerite is a differentiated mafic sill, very similar to the Colmac system, except it's been mined for over 100 years, produced over 60 million ounces of gold, and sits in a rather interesting camp that's pretty prolific too. So for me, it wasn't so much a promotional angle, it was an angle to explore. So I could take and borrow 100 years of mining and exploration and apply it to target generation at Colmac. And also knowing that the camp that it's sitting in, this was all overlooked. So you had a mini Golden Mile dolerite sitting in the northwest territories. Was a good place, and it kind of validated our theory that there was an opportunity to grow some asset base here. When I first showed this to Kinross, they wanted to see the site. They wanted to go on a site visit right away, because the principal there is an Australian who worked in the Kalgoorlie camp. So he saw it right away, and that's what triggered Kinross's interest in what we're doing. Subsequently, they brought over a structural geologist from Australia who had a long history of working in the Kalgoorlie camp, PhD structural geologist, a consultant that works all over the world. He spent 6 days on our site, looked at all the core, toured around the camp, and he said not only is it very, very similar to the dolerite in Australia, but the camp that it sits in has a lot of similarities to the Kalgoorlie camp. So we knew, we were on the right track with what we were doing. The market wasn't always there to share our enthusiasm, but we've seen some few good years in 16, 17, 18 that has allowed us to develop that thesis. Just a diagram that shows you the similarities between the Kalgoorlie and the Colmac system. I stole this from an article in the Ore Deposit Reviews that was comparing Colmac and Timmins, the two richest, or Kalgoorlie and Timmins, the two richest Archean gold camps on the planet. And I just kicked Timmins out and dropped Colmac in because it's very similar in their morphology and, as you can say, in their age and so on and so forth. They had one big dissimilarity, and that's Kalgoorlie had a history of grade that was exploited in its early years, and Colmac didn't. So it was either Colmac doesn't have the potential to host grade, or no one bothered to look because they weren't driving their exploration by using a model method, which is a killer if you're an explorationist. So I just looked at the factors that led to the localization of the higher grade lodes in Golden Mile Dolerite, and just started looking for those at Colmac. So it's a pretty simple process once you know what you're dealing with. In 2014, I drilled the first hole, testing one of these targets, and cut 52 meters to 7.8 grams, a 30-meter true width intercept, 100 meters north of the pit. You can see the pit in the center of the diagram on this longitudinal section. That's the scalloped out portion. So the high-grade chute that we first found was sitting right under their noses at 4 or 5 times the grade of the pit. They didn't know the potential, and they didn't know it existed, but it gave us an opportunity to begin the process of reinventing Colmac, because in its day it was a large tonnage, low-grade open pit, so you're limited to the depth that you can exploit to, obviously. These high-grade domains, if they're wide enough and rich enough, will theoretically allow us to possibly ramp and get deeper into the system, because the Colmac sill was drilled down to almost 1 kilometer by Royal Oak, and it's mineralized over its whole length, and it's not fault interrupted at all. In terms of the potential of this sill to accommodate ounces, all that hatch pattern in orange and gray, that's our 2.1 million ounces. To the far right of the diagram, you can see that they hadn't drilled much below 50 to 75 meters, even though they were mining this and processing it with a 10,000 ton a day mill. So it was a unique opportunity to explore something that's hardly been hit. And you can see there's vast areas as well that were never drilled. So, the real estate here, from my perspective, if we've got 2.1 on the stippled and we look like maybe you can take a pit down to 250 meters, you could double that resource theoretically, which then changes the nature of what we're looking at. We're not looking at a residual deposit that was diverted to the crown to reclaim it, but it has some opportunity. And our ambition was to pursue that and see where it would take us. That's not the only high-grade domain. There are others underneath the pit, and far left is a zone 3.5. We know less of those, so we're working on those in the upcoming year. There's one to the far right called Zone 1. We're just beginning our drilling on that to see if it's going to give us the same joy as Zone 1.5 did. Zone 1.5 currently sits at a 300-meter strike length, 30 to 60-meter true width, and from surface down to 600 meters. Not fully drilled off, but that gives you the size of opportunity that these little chutes can allow us to exploit. This diagram just shows that discovery hole on the left. That was the hole drilled in 2014. Top of the sill is the pinkish color, so that's the more brittle, and that's where the stockwork style of quartz veining develops. Drilled another section 25 meters north of that, and I wanted to test the mineralization over, say, an elevation of about 150 meters, and you can see by the profile that the gold is still in that system over that elevation. And in fact, the sill appears to be getting wider with depth from a 30-meter true width all the way down to a 50-meter at the lowest cut. So there was some question as to whether or not the sill is actually widening. The payload portion of the sill is widening with depth. We did test that, and it widened to 155 meters at depth. Don't know if the high-grade core of that is also widening or whether it dissipates out. That's something that we're testing today. This is just a longitudinal section of that zone 1.5, that new discovery zone. Those red dots are just pierce points to some holes that correlate to the table on the right. But what we're showing here is the plunge. It's a structurally controlled domain that does have a distinct plunge, and we can now begin to pursue it with our drill down depth. What's controlling the localization of these things? It's its structure. So zone 1.5 in the center of the diagram at the south end, you can see that the sill is dislocated, so there's a fault there that disrupts the sill and brackets, and in fact the sill itself blisters out a bit, so it's widening in there. That's one of the reasons why I popped a hole in there, to test that thesis. And really what you're doing is these secondary structural elements are creating even better ground preparation for the development of the quartz veins. So we start looking for those along the trend of the sill to try to find new targets, and that's just a very simple process that we're exploring currently. Our 2018 exploration program started March 9th. We're drilling, as I said, over 25,000 meters. But also, we're now starting to test our regional targets, because the whole thesis here was you've got this multi-million ounce deposit that was grossly misunderstood, that has an analog to one of the world's richest Archean gold systems, sitting in the middle of your greenstone belt. And those things don't happen in isolation anywhere else on the planet, right? Usually, if you're talking about a robust system active in a Archean terrain that's capable of depositing several million ounces, it probably isn't isolated. And we know it's not, because we already worked on some of those satellite deposits. So we're now going back and rejuvenating that work that we did in 2009, 10, and 11 before we acquired Colmac, to really show people that there is value in this ownership package. And this is one of the reasons why Kinross is looking at it and supportive of what we're doing. One of the areas is called Lead Arm. This is 15 kilometers south of Colmac. It's a 10-kilometer long fault corridor that's got gold mineralization along its whole length. It's actually a thrust fault trace. There's 4 deposits that sit in the core of this thing in the central, and 2 that were developed underground in the 1950s and not touched since at $25 gold. So, the first hole I drilled into it was, let's sample outside the veins, because they wouldn't have. Then we started cutting stuff at 26 meters of mineralization of 7+ grams. Nothing here has been drilled below 100 meters, and certainly the flanks of that fault corridor have never been drilled. That's something that we're progressing forward on. But I would just say that if you had this sort of showing in any of our traditional mining camps that had not seen the scale of drilling that we do see in Timmins and Red Lake and Val-d'Or, yet there's this inventory of metal, it's a great target, right? And you can't walk away from something like that. All these satellite targets represent opportunities to augment Colmac, which Royal Oak never had, because we're the first company to consolidate the whole camp. We started the program off this year drilling this. I put 8,000 meters into this since March 9th to test and work out some of those targets. This one's really interesting, Damati Lake gold and iron formation. It's where I first started working up there in 2009. Incredible grade, small tonnage, about a half-ounce deposit that Anaconda Mining defined in 2005. See, they were going to take the heart of this deposit out, which is a 25-gram grade at an 8-gram cutoff. They put a ramp down into it and walked away. But the potential for Damati is quite nice. When we worked on it, there's a potential to triple that inventory that they were looking at by simply dropping the cutoff to 3 grams and looking at what residually could be there. And this, the potential is quite dramatic. You could have upwards of $200-300 million of rock sitting there, not big enough to warrant infrastructure builds, no place to truck it to. So it's essentially landlocked. But if Colmac gets going, now you've got that right at your doorstep that you own. You got a ramp into it, and it's connected to Colmac with an ice road that we permitted in 48 hours. So these are the sorts of things we want to keep building in this land package to help de-risk any sort of potential decisions at Colmac. The other thing is you got a half-ounce deposit that no one explored with a model, much like Colmac. So I've already set up a bunch of holes here. It's structurally controlled. No one's ever drilled the structural control in this. No one's ever drilled beneath this. Some of the deposits in the Canadian landscape, in particular Musselwhite that Goldcorp is mining in northwestern Ontario, the evolution of Musselwhite was drilling deep below the fold structures, and someone took a shot down deep and intersected the deep mineralization. This thing bottoms out at 125 meters, yet it's got that cachet metal, and no one's ever drilled a hole underneath to see if the stratigraphy is duplicating itself. No one ever drilled the potential shear emanated out of the nose of the folds, which is another Musselwhite target, right, that they discovered about 4 years ago. But that deposit was looked at for 40 years, and it's going to, eventually segue into a 5+ million ounce opportunity. I would say Damati's seen considerably less than that and has a great opportunity to provide more ounces to what we're doing up there. We own 3 gold and iron formation showings/deposits in the camp. Another interesting area and this is when we drilled in 2011. Before we got Colmac, Treasure Island, we cut 1/4 kilometer of 3/4 gram material, not ore, but a 1/4 kilometer of alteration and mineralization is very intriguing, and it runs for several kilometers east-west, and no one's drilled it outside the showings at Treasure Island, so we're going to start drilling there next week. And I think that's pretty much it. Share structure slide. I won't walk you through it all, just that we do have good shareholder support. It's matured over the years, much like the assets, and we've been fortunate for that, for keeping our hands on our land package, which only cost us $100,000 a year to maintain that big land package, simply because they're mostly mining leases, and we acquired most of the ground through staking, except the purchase with the federal government. Leave it there. Thank you.
Time for a quick question for Michael, if there's any. Good, because I have one. The amount of drill result success that you're having, for me, just begs the question as to whether, do you keep the drills turning, or are you kind of entering PEA mode at this point?
No, 2018 will just be a continuation of what we did in 2017. 16, 17, 18 have been our most active years. From 12 onward, we're not. So we haven't put a lot of meters into this deposit. As you can see in that longitudinal section, there's big gaps of unknown. So it's early yet for us to be thinking about a PEA. I mean, we get that question quite a lot, and we're going to continue on track with just the discovery process, the exploration process, and that at some point in the future we'll get the critical mass where we'll start looking at the optionality of doing a PEA.
Excellent, thank you. A true exploration play. And Michael obviously has a long track record of success. Michael is available from about 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock up in the Nova Scotia room for one-on-one meetings. So thank you, Michael.
Thanks.